Well, hello, excuse me, everybody. We're excited to have this workshop today to talk about Vision 2050. Today is November 14th, 2023, and we'll be talking about the Long Range Transportation Plan, Vision 2050. I have a presentation we'll walk through, and we will have an opportunity for you to ask questions. And there will be several opportunities to engage with us as we go through the presentation. So invite anybody that would like to participate and follow along to grab your cell phones and have those ready, or be prepared to go to a browser of your choice and enter the website that we're going to use to facilitate our engagement activities as we go through the presentation. My name is Nathan George. I am Palm Beach Transportation Planning Agency's Long Range Transportation Planning Coordinator. I'll be walking you through the presentation today. Very excited to have you here. And for anybody who's tuning in to review this webinar, the recorded version of it, feel free to contact me if you have any questions, if you're not watching this event live, and we'll be happy to engage with you offline. So today's agenda, we want to walk through a handful of interim milestones, if you will. We're in the middle of this process, so I'm going to walk through just a few key items as we're continuing our work on development of Vision 2050. So we're going to talk a little bit about Vision 2050 fundamentals, just some of the process that we're working through. I want to dive back into some policy considerations that are going to inform this process and developing this plan. Give you some updates on projects. We've been working through a very robust process to get our project list pulled together. So we're going to give you an update on that, and then we'll walk through some next steps. So that's our outline for today. I want to give you a few highlights for audience participation. For today's webinars, we are in a virtual format today. We will have an in-person format on Thursday. So for today, since we're all in our own separate places, please feel free to use the Q&A box. You can use that to share any questions you have during the presentation. We'll hold questions until the end. If you have questions once we get to the end and you'd like to speak, please feel free to use the raise hand button, and you can use that as an opportunity to alert us that you want to speak, and we'll get you the ability to unmute your microphone and share any questions or comments that you have at that time. Also want to highlight for you that we're once again using our Mentimeter tool. That's a way that we can engage with our audience interactively as we go through the presentation. So menti.com, you'll be able to scan a QR that will take you to those survey opportunities, or you can enter menti.com and then put in the code, and that will allow you to engage with us. So for today, we're going to get started with a Mentimeter just to get everybody familiar with this tool again. So if you have a phone, you can use the QR code to enter Menti, or you can go to menti.com and enter this code 3725798. It's on the screen. So feel free to go in and answer that polling question. Let's practice what's your favorite way to travel. It's just a way for you to get familiar with that tool. I see 4 folks have entered. So please feel free to enter your favorite mode of travel. We're not going to score or rank any of these responses, but very excited to see some folks getting in here and sharing their thoughts and hopefully familiarizing yourself with the tool. Please keep that browser open. That will allow you to engage with us when we get further into the presentation, when those polling questions come up. And great to see so many walkers and bikers and multimodal ways of travel. That's what we're looking for here at TPA. All right, our timeline. It's good to remind everybody just where we are, because this is a 2-year process. So we are at the closeout of what we called the fall timeframe call for projects. We'll have an update on that a little bit later in the presentation. But again, this is a 2-year process that we're working through. We're getting now into the needs and assessment portion of developing Vision 2050, and then we'll get into project selection, scenario development. Those, what are we going to actually do with this plan? We'll get into those processes early next year, but that's where we are currently. Wanted to highlight for everybody, we're writing the first chapter of this story, what Vision 2050 means for all of us. So I wanted to bring in a reminder of what, these are some of the tools, some of the guidance. It's a lot that we have to work from a federal guidance perspective, but this is a little bit of a highlight of how we have to think about transportation when we're looking at a long-range plan. So Wanted to give you a highlight from the Code of Federal Regulations, which is the federal guidance. And this is an area where they're talking about the congestion management strategy. Thought it was a good highlight. So the role of our long-range transportation plan is to, and I'm just going to read the highlights, provide for the development of an integrated multimodal transportation system and facilitate the safe and efficient movement of people and goods. Very good takeaways there. But I'm going to highlight for you one of those areas that's in gray, and that's strategies and actions. So the goal of today's conversation is really to talk about these two aspects of what we're doing with Vision 2050, looking at our strategies, what are our goals and policies that inform this process, and then talk about our actions, the projects. What are we actually going to go out there and do in the world? So that's going to be the core focus of what we talk about today. We'll have subsequent conversations where we talk about these in a lot more detail and the project specifically. But today's a more high-level conversation about how those frameworks really inform this process. For those of you who have been involved in this process, we've talked about this 4-step process. Really just wanted to, for anybody who may be new to the process, give you just a little bit of framework of what a long-range transportation plan is. This is our 25-year horizon that looks at what is it that we want to do in this region over the next 25 years. So, and that informs then our near-term budget, what we call the Transportation Improvement Plan. That's $4.1 billion over the next 5 years. So this is the framework that TPA works within. A long-range transportation plan is the long and big, robust vision that we have for the region. And then that informs our actual funding of projects over that near term in the Transportation Improvement Program. So it's important to keep that in mind as we're working on developing this overall plan. Wanted to highlight for you some key considerations as we think about that from a policy perspective. So one of those is our project funding authority. And as TPA looks at project funding, we're primarily looking at capital expenses. So wanted to highlight for you, we're primarily thinking about tangible projects, things that are going to be there regardless of if a human being has any interaction with it. So it's our streets and roads. If we're talking about transit, it's the buses, it's the train cars. Those are capital expenses. The operating expenses, there are some areas where we have the ability to fund those, but primarily those come out of local funding sources. And then talking about project funding, TPA's influence is primarily over the federal and state dollars. We don't typically have as much oversight over local. We don't have oversight over local per se, except where we might encourage that local funding to go towards projects that align with our goals and objectives, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. The area where we do have a lot of influence is TPA's planning authority. So Palm Beach Transportation Planning Agency, we plan transportation facilities at the county level. So all of Palm Beach County is our planning area. So just wanted to highlight for you, that's where we really have a lot of influence. How are we going to help direct those funds in a way that improves transportation at this scale across the county? The other highlight that we have here is that we are focused on urban areas, that the majority of the funding that we are helping to administer in this region is our urban area funds, and that predominantly where our population lives. 99% of our population is in urbanized areas in this county. So pretty much everybody who lives and who's listening on this webinar today falls within that darker gray area within the county. We're still planning outside of that boundary. So that's just an important acknowledgement that we look at this at a scale that is countywide. So I said we're going to ask you a couple of interactive questions. Here's your first opportunity to engage with that. So this process has been informed by a public survey. And at this time, we want to ask, what would you say are your highest priorities for county leaders? And give you a handful of examples. I'm going to show you what the results were from that survey, but we want to give you an opportunity to see how your responses align with the responses we got from others. Again, a reminder that Menti polling number is at the top of the screen. If you need to see that again to log in, menti.com. Let's see, 4 responses. We're starting to get some responses in. What's really interesting is as we look at this, we start to see some of the comparison between what our TPA aligned participants, folks who are engaged with the agency, how that matches up with the statistically significant survey that we conducted. And you see some very interesting results. So we've got some combination for 2, and then provide more housing 2, addressing traffic congestion at 1, and managing growth at 1. So I will advance to the next slide just to give you an idea of how folks were responding to that question when we asked it at a countywide perspective. And unsurprisingly, we saw that a lot of folks were interested in housing and affordability issues that, basic economic considerations are on everybody's front of mind right now. We did recently have a housing bond that passed here in the county, so that certainly is on everybody's mind. And then rounding everything else out, we had kind of around that 5 to 10% for the majority of other categories, or we had a slightly higher percentage where folks were just interested generally in those other themes. But certainly affordability is an area that we saw a lot of interest in as we went out to the public to get this process started. All right, question number 2. This is focused specifically on transportation. So what are some of the areas where you feel there should be the highest priority from a transportation perspective? I'll give you all a moment to start answering that question. All right, starting to get some responses in. So adding new transportation options, providing more services in growth areas, transit planning, or a combination. And so unsurprisingly, the responses that we got to this were a little more traditionally oriented in, the way we've traditionally looked at transportation was addressing traffic congestion. And about 1 in 3 respondents, that was their focus, 28%. What we did see as we look at these numbers is that adding transportation options such as streetcars or light rail and expanding services for people who are economically disadvantaged, those 2 categories, which make up about 30% as well, the combined total of those 2 categories and addressing traffic congestion makes up about 60% or 2/3 of the responses we got on this question. And it's really interesting that the relationship between those 2 interests, addressing traffic congestion, the 2 largest responses we had there are largely the areas where we can address traffic congestion, providing more options, providing folks alternatives. So these were some really important takeaways that we got early in this process that was completed in August. So what we found from the survey was that quality of life was really a key theme for folks who live here in Palm Beach County. That affordability specifically was one of the areas that a lot of folks are focused on right now, not just from a transportation perspective, but also from a housing perspective. So those are areas that we will continue to explore as we develop this plan. How can we make transportation affordable? How can transportation make housing affordable? How can both of those improve the quality of life in this region and also make us a more robust and competitive region as we think about things like the economy and workforce and how can we attract jobs? So those are all interrelated themes. One of the other areas that we saw from the survey was that this theme of all ages, or folks being interested in things like quality schools, good place to retire, the relationship of that, both of those elder and youth issues to affordability. So these are related, but certainly we want to make sure that this region addresses the needs of a broad spectrum of the population. And then another area that was a little bit less prominent, but we wanted to test, was this idea of protecting the environment. So resilience is an area it has a lot of attention, certainly an area that we want to focus on. How can this plan help elevate resilience and climate adaptation and issues like that as we start to think about how we make our investments, because unwise investments that don't have that lens tend to not last very long if we're not considering the environment we're making those investments within. So resilience is certainly an area that we're looking at and helping to preserve and protect our environment, because we have a lot of critical environmental areas here in our county. The foundation of this plan is really our LRTP goals, and those are established. They are, a tradition around Palm Beach TPA in our vision statement. So we talk about providing a safe, efficient, connected, and multimodal system. So we have used those as our goals. They were the 2045 goals, and we're carrying those forward as the 2050 goals. They're very good goals and something that we can really build around. So we'll talk a little bit more about goals in just a minute. And as I mentioned, resilience is also a consideration there. We talked about this more in terms of maintaining our infrastructure. Now we're focused not just on the maintenance, but how can it be resilient? How can we use our investments to wisely make this transportation infrastructure more resilient, both from an environmental perspective, but also financial, because there are considerations there that a resilient system requires less maintenance. So those are certainly themes we'll continue to explore. As we're starting to look at projects, we're focusing in now on transportation priorities. We're working through a needs assessment I'll talk a little bit more about later in the presentation. But we're really looking at what are our needs across the region in all modes, and also thinking about some future considerations. So, that includes everything from our traditional bike, ped, car, transit, which is traditionally how transportation is looked at. But we're also looking at investments that we might make tactically that might be operational enhancements. How can we maybe improve signals so they operate more efficiently? How might we operate our infrastructure more efficiently so that we can use that the capacity that's on a road? So that might be things like ramp metering. That falls under what we call intelligent transportation systems. And then how does emerging technology influence all of this discussion? So that's things like electric cars, and folks have been talking about electrical vertical takeoff and landing, drones. There are a lot of different things that we're seeing in the transportation industry, and emerging technology is something that we have to explore as we start to think about not just 2050, not looking out at 25 years into the future, but maybe looking a little bit beyond and starting to think about how this is going to influence the conversation, not just for this plan, but also as we develop plans into the future. Another critical consideration, we have to remember that we are the northern part of the Miami urban area. So Miami, Dade County, Fort Lauderdale, and Broward, and Palm Beach County are this really big integrated 6 million person population area that is along the Atlantic Ocean to our east and the Everglades to our west. And we're really confined into an area that can be developed. And so our urban boundary really has now grown out to those environmental boundaries, and that influences how we're going to grow. Palm Beach County is also growing at a pretty substantial rate. So that's an important acknowledgement that we're currently 1.5 million people, 1.5 million. This region is expected to grow another 300,000 folks over the next 25 years, up to about 1.8 million. Those numbers are pretty round. This is from our 2045 plan, but the end result is 1.8 million people in this county. And so that's a lot of folks to live here. We're growing at a pretty rapid rate. So growth and where folks are going to live, the housing considerations, housing component of this plan are important considerations. And so as we're thinking about how transportation meets multiple needs and aligns with the growth that we're experiencing, we have to step back and think about how has transportation planning gotten us where we are today, and how are we going to accomplish our goals and objectives into the future. And so one of the areas I've been talking about a bit is we're thinking about how we grow 12,000 residents a year, 1.8 million folks in 2050. When we get to that date, are we going to be able to accomplish that by traditional means? And the answer really is no. A historic approach has been congestion management, and how might we address that pressure that occurs with growth by widening roads and expanding them. And at a certain point, those investments start to have diminishing returns. So we have to look at what are our options and services. How can we use money to, less money to do more, which is really the challenge when you're dealing with limited financial resources. And so we have to find an appropriate balance. It doesn't mean we don't widen roads. It doesn't mean that the only solution is transit or bike and ped lanes and sidewalks, but we have to find the right balance to help achieve our goals into the future. And so that's what's intended here. It's not to say that congestion, if we heap everything onto congestion, everything pretty much is going to stay tilted in that direction. So we have to take a balanced approach, and that's the message here. And so here is the Code of Federal Regulations. Again, this is our guidance from the federal government, what they're looking for as we think about dealing with congestion. So I'm focusing on that for this presentation, really specifically, just to highlight the considerations and the hierarchy, that guidance we're getting from the federal government. So this is a hierarchy where they say that, you know, we can deal with congestion through a variety of strategies, and this is, you know, in order. So we can provide demand management. So might more people work remotely? That's a demand management strategy. Could we have operational improvements? So making smaller investments in things like signal technology. Then maybe we provide public transportation that allows more people to get more efficiently through this community and through our region. Then we might invest in ITS technology, which is a more robust infrastructure that occurs along the interstates. And when necessary, when we get to that last step, that's where we look at adding capacity. This is the federal guidance, so we're taking that strategic approach of how can we maximize the use of our dollars and where are they going to provide the greatest benefit to the region. So we'll try as much as we can to follow this sort of layered approach as we start to think about projects. I want to talk a little bit about the role of policy. We've gone through an exercise to talk about our goals, objectives, and strategies. So I'm going to provide a few highlights there. But want to provide that reminder as well. So there's a good opportunity for folks to continue to provide input on this so we can solidify what our goals and objectives are. And I'm just going to highlight a goal is a desired outcome, an objective is a broad ambition, and a strategy is a discrete action. So these are the policies that influence, you know, what we believe it will take to accomplish our goals, objectives, and strategies. This is the hierarchy of how we're going to actually accomplish change in this region from a transportation perspective. And we've spent a lot of effort early on in this process, refining those objectives and strategies to be a bit broader and to provide a bit more detail, I will say, put a little bit more meat on the bone, if you will, of the objectives and providing strategies that are these discrete tools that we can use so that we can take our goals, objectives, and strategies and use those to help measure projects. So I'll highlight that in a minute. From that process, I did want to highlight a few key considerations. TPA's goals, objectives, and strategies are framed in broad terms, so they are not overly specific. And the reasons for that, we want to make sure they serve our diverse stakeholders. So we have broad interest, state, county, municipal governments, even our transit operators and agencies. So we need to serve the diverse needs of all of those stakeholders at varying scales and sizes. So we want to make sure that we're using broad enough language, and we don't want to be so specific that we de-emphasize anything by omission. So that's, you know, if we say something's very specific about a proprietary technology, something that's, you know, very specific, then we're being so specific that it requires that same level of detail of every possible example that would be similar. So we want to make sure that these goals and objectives are broad enough. And I just want to encourage everybody, as you look at our draft goals and objectives, make sure you think about everything in terms of having it be broad enough to capture all of the ideas and not so specific that they would exclude and require additional outlining of objectives or strategies. Here's one example of that. I'm highlighting the goal SAFE, just to give you an idea of how detailed this policy process is. And again, as I said, we went through a bit of effort to try and outline more specifically all the different ways that we can accomplish our goals. So our objectives are defined in a bit more detail, and then we provided numerous strategies that are supportive of those objectives. This allows us to check the box, if you will. That's what's shown on the bottom of the slide. So check the box, which strategies have we completed with a project? So we can start to see how well each project aligns with our goals, objectives, and strategies. And then we can use that as part of our scoring process. And so here's how that could look. This is what I'm envisioning based on other examples that I've looked at from across the country, really. The way that we can take our scoring and use it to visually depict how well projects align with our goals and objectives. So taking policy and using that to help inform conversations about how projects score and their ranking. And so the way that we're envisioning doing that is looking at scoring in two ways and then plotting it on a matrix. So first is goal alignment, the example I just gave. So basically, how many boxes did you check? We'll have to tweak the variables, how those scores all would line up. So is it 1 or 2 points? Is it 3 points? We'll figure all of the details specifically out as we start vetting projects, and we can figure out how to score from a goal alignment perspective. Then the idea on the opposite axis, that bottom to top, is a value to cost index. So that would be a way that we could measure the influence of these investments. So, for every dollar that we're investing, how many people will that influence from a transportation perspective? So we can start to benchmark both goal alignment and a value to cost, or whatever measure that ends up ultimately being. So then we can start to highlight what these projects look like in terms of, are they really high alignment, the green box where it falls above both benchmarks? Might they provide more benefit in either goal or value to cost index? So those would be the two blue boxes. And then anything that falls below that would be falling below both benchmarks. That process does not mean that a project would not be offering significant value to the region. So we'll also conduct secondary screening. So we'll look at factors like equity. So are you in a traditionally underserved community? Does a project have a safety benefit that we need to highlight? Could there be a resilience consideration? So there are additional ways that projects may not show as high of a score, but they provide substantial benefit that may be elevated through a secondary screening process. So this is the method, the approach that we're intending to take to start to look at projects and how well they align with these goals and objectives, and give tools to our stakeholders and to our board ultimately to make decisions about which projects are the most important to fund, and how all projects pan out as we work through the vetting process. And here's an example of that secondary screening. So equity, are we focused on projects, or how can we elevate a project to make sure that it is equitable and not equal, or any benefits that a project might be able to accomplish? So that's why we're going to focus on equity. Safety, this example comes from safe systems, and how might we layer additional safety enhancements. So we're looking at these tools as different ways that a project may not look as strong from a scoring perspective, but it may provide these other benefits. So we want to make sure that we don't miss those opportunities, and those are identified for separate consideration outside the scoring process, if you will. Last poll question, and we're just about to the end of the presentation. We can open it up to Q&A. So how would you measure project benefits? So this is really just a question of, is there anything from a strategy perspective that you might want to look at for how we might rank our projects? So I shared that we're focused mostly on aligning with our strategies, things like improving the high injury network, focusing our investments from a safety perspective where people are being injured, things like that. If there are any examples that come to mind for you, I just wanted to give folks the opportunity to put in your responses there. We love the affordable housing link. That's certainly something that we've tried to work in from a policy perspective. See some great responses here. Focus on safety. That's certainly our focus. Reducing fatalities, that's part of our performance measures. So we're really excited to hear everybody's feedback. That was a very involved process working through the goals and objectives, and we'll have more opportunities for folks to continue to provide input. in that regard. Heat and climate impacts, we were just talking about transit riders and their how heat influences travel throughout the region when you're traveling, by transit. All right. You can continue to provide your responses there. I'm going to jump ahead to the next slide. Wanted to give everybody a highlight of the Vision 2050 call for projects. For those of you who may be part of our stakeholder groups who have responded, I want to say thank you to everybody who submitted. As I mentioned, we had 12 agencies that have responded, and over 550 projects were submitted. So we've had a lot of response there. Staff here at TPA are working on processing all of that. We have made the decision to extend our call for projects formally. We want to make sure that other agencies that did not have a chance to respond, we give them a longer date, extend that date to December 16th, just to make sure folks have an opportunity to provide their projects. It's probably going to take us a couple more weeks to process all these projects that we do have so far. So we've formally extended that process. I'll be sending out notification to all of our stakeholder parties to let them know. But for anybody who did not have a chance to submit that may be on the call today, now we'll be extending that to December 16th. And for anybody who did submit and may want to make changes, we'll be reaching back out to talk with every agency about their submittals, and you can feel free to continue to submit if you have additional ideas that you didn't have a chance to incorporate when you submitted. TPA staff are currently processing all of those project submissions. It's going to be a pretty tedious process to get everything documented. And then ultimately what we're going to do is take all of that data that we're pulling into a GIS database. We're going to create a summary sheet out of that information so we can share everything we've recorded, get confirmation from all of the project sponsors that everything we are reflecting in our plan is consistent and precise, and make sure that we have all the details recorded appropriately. So we'll be sending those details out as everything gets processed and into the correct format, so folks can agree that everything we have is correct. Now, I want to highlight for everybody next steps. So as I mentioned, we're working through this process of getting all of those projects into our database, into that format, so we can start the project evaluation and scoring process. I mentioned how we're planning to do our draft evaluation and scoring. So as we get all of this data processed and cleaned and in the correct format, we'll start that process of evaluating and scoring, which hopefully we'll have our first draft completed in December. Draft multimodal needs evaluation is an ongoing process that TPA is working with our consultant to get a needs evaluation of the region. That looks more broadly beyond just what projects were submitted. What are other needs that may not have been identified through this process? We're working through that process. Hopefully we'll have that first draft in December, but the culmination of having both the project evaluation scoring and the needs evaluation completed is that we can get that information out in front of all of our stakeholders early next year in 2024. So you can start to see the projects and the needs that we're selecting from as we start to talk about programming. So that's early next year. We'll start talking about project vetting and have workshops like this, but those will be focused specifically on the results of this accumulation of all of this data, starting to look at how our projects starting to filter out what are looking at like high priorities. And so early conversations about what we might start talking about programming, but it will be that early first take of here's everything that we've seen and how it starts to shake out from a scoring perspective, and what might we need to tweak and refine, what might be missing. So that'll be an important part of the conversation as we start to go out to the public with this information as well. There are a number of ways to get involved, and I'm putting on here get involved very much universally, I would say. So we have a variety of tools that are on our website that folks can go and interact with. And I'm going to highlight what's on the website currently, and then I'm also going to touch on a few of the displays that we're going to have printed and up on display when folks come to the meeting on Thursday. And we'll get those posted so everybody on this call can interact with them as well. So first, on the website, We've talked a lot about the transportation survey. I briefed you on the survey earlier in this presentation. We have a copy of that up on the website that folks can go and take. All the call for project details for our stakeholders, that's for municipal governments, operators of transportation facilities. Basically, if you maintain a transportation asset that's eligible for funding, they can submit projects, and all those details are on the website. We have this public comment map, and that's the one that I wanted to highlight for everybody today. That's an area where if you are not eligible to submit a project because you wouldn't be able to sponsor it, but you have an idea for a transportation improvement, this is your opportunity, whether you're public, stakeholder, whoever you are. If you have an interest in improving transportation in this region, that is your tool to share with us. I have a need, or I am expressing a concern, or I know of an opportunity. Use that map, go to the location where whatever is, and tell us about it. It's a safety concern, it's an operational concern, whatever it may be. That's your opportunity to share those comments, and that information is really helpful as we start to look at projects and where we might have needs, and we can start to see alignment between the projects and where we might see public comments. So very important information as folks have that opportunity. We also have details about our public workshops. We've been working through what we call the 561 corridor or mobility vision workshops, exploring our enhanced transit corridors. So that's another area we've been exploring as well. And so we'll continue posting more details about public workshops as we get into next year and we start talking about project workshops and getting out to the public to talk about some of those needs as well. On our website, we will also cross-link to today's event page. We're going to post all of the poster boards that will be on display on Thursday, and that will walk through a little bit more detail about projects and process, so how projects get into this plan and how that informs getting projects funded. So we have some information for you about that. The funding sources and information will be highlighted on a separate board. We have specific boards that talk about the goals and objectives. So for anybody who wants to provide input on that policy, there's a survey that's specific to that board that you can go and take and get information about that. And then there's also a location that you can go and get more information about this scoring process that we're going to be working through. So those boards will all be available. Just go to the website palmbeachtpa.org/LRTP, and you'll see a link to get over to those boards, or go to the November 14th workshop, and you'll see the information posted there on the events page. So that concludes the presentation. I want to thank everybody for taking time to participate, listen in today. Again, my name is Nathan George. If you have any questions or want to speak with me about this process, please feel free to reach out, and I will be happy to speak with you and answer any questions you may have. But we're live, so for folks who are on the call today, if you have any questions, please feel free to pop those into the Q&A box, or please raise your hand and we will call on you and give you the opportunity to speak. So I will pause and see if any questions come in, or give folks the opportunity to raise their hand. I see Ross has his hand raised.
Hi, Nathan. Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me? Hi, Nathan. Can you hear me?
And I'm sorry, I'm unable to hear you.
Hello, can you hear me now? Hello, hello. Hi, Nathan. Can you hear me now?
All right, go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, sorry about that.
I was on my end. Thank you.
All right, I got two questions for you. This comment map that you brought up, that's the best way for residents to get involved in this process?
I will not say it's the best way, but I will say it is the best location specific way to engage with us. So that's a tool similar to a call for projects where you can go to a specific location and express any challenges, concerns, or ideas that you have for improving transportation at that specific spot. So it's really, I would say, the most detailed way that you can share an opportunity, and then we can use that to review against projects that have been submitted, or is it eligible for funding. So it really gives us a way that we can interact with comments that we're receiving from members of the public, or even from folks who, visitors, folks who may not be traditional stakeholders in this community. That's the best way for you to give us those really specific, location specific details that we can then use to evaluate as we're looking at projects, and to see if they align with the needs that we identified. It could be in a way that we identify a need that didn't otherwise come to the surface based on staff or consultant review of opportunities in the region.
Sure, that's understandable. And just to follow up on that one, you clarified that it's not the best way, but it's the best specific location specific way. What would you classify as the best way?
So there are additional opportunities that, either now or into the future, folks can provide input. So, I'm just saying that there are additional opportunities, and depending on how you want to provide input, the comment map is really about specific locations. We have the survey, which allows you to provide input on, that really informs sort of the broad policy conversation, like what are the most important issues to the region, that sort of thing. We're also going to be putting out an opportunity to provide transportation testimonials. So that will be a way that folks can say in their own words, how's the system working? How might we improve it? It'll give us some really good examples, the user perspectives that can help inform the plan itself. And so there may be some additional opportunities for folks to provide input depending on what tools we're able to establish as we work through the process. But we have a variety of ways that you can engage, and it's really we welcome input in all the formats that we have, and we'll continue to post those on the website. I'd say also the most important highlight for everybody is sign up. There's a registration, put in your name and email, and that will allow us to maintain contact as we work through the process, because a really important part of this process is when we start to develop that project list. That's an opportunity for members of the public to provide input on the projects themselves and the vetting process that we'll be going through with committees and the board. So, ultimately what gets funded, that project list, that will be the most important conversation that we'll have as we get into next year, as we start to talk specifically about what projects make their way into the plan.
Sure. Thank you. And my second question, the matrix idea, I think is a great idea. Is that something that has to be adopted by, say, the governing board, or is that something more that just staff can implement?
Right now, the plan is we will take this approach and use that to develop a draft list, or kind of what a staff level assessment of project scoring will be. Ultimately, the scoring that we adopt is going to be at the direction of our committees and board. So there will be some formal adoption process of how we, beyond just how staff assesses projects, how we officially record, what the variables were, how we ensure that we've calibrated the model, if you will, how we've calibrated all of those inputs to yield the appropriate results. So there will be, I'd say, opportunities for some input in how we perform that calibration, and what ultimately informs scoring. That's going to be a consultative process, if you will, to arrive at what we call final.
Sure, I get that. I'm as a resident of West Palm Beach, our favorite State Road 7 project, I'm interested to see where that falls in the matrix.
Yeah, I will say the matrix as it's currently presented is for review of projects that are new, that would be incorporated into the plan. the ultimate goal that I have personally would be that all projects in the 2050 plan, by the time we get to the end of this process, would have a similar score, so that we establish a process to, in future LRTP cycles, that agencies would recommit to all of their projects being included in the long-range transportation plan. It's a process that some other agencies have implemented that I think is a best practice, but it stands, it remains to be seen if we'll be able to get to that point by the end of this process. But that is a goal to help ensure that all projects are recommitted every 5 years when this plan is updated. And thanks for the comments and questions.
Yep. Thank you so much for your time.
Did we have any other hands raised? Or any other questions? Again, greatly appreciate everybody taking the time to join us here today. All right. Give you one last chance. Anybody wants to raise their hand? If not, I will remind everybody, as it shows on the screen, palmbeachtpa.org/LRTP. That is your resource to continue to get information about this process and how we're updating this plan. Go to that page and use our sign up if you want to stay engaged in this process. If you're not already one of those folks who are committed and engaged as a member of a committee or a board, but want to encourage folks to sign up there and go to that site, engage with our resources. You'll have plenty of opportunities to provide your input. That helps us produce a better product, have a better plan when we get to the end of this process. I want to thank everybody for attending, and also remind you, take a look at that page. Go take a look at the additional information. We'll have that posted shortly after this meeting concludes. We look forward to continuing to engage with you throughout this process. So thank you for participating. Calling once, calling twice. Just making sure nobody else has raised their hand. Thanks so much. We appreciate your time.